Before we begin this episode of Let's Talk About You and this conversation on women's health care in this country, there are some facts that we all need to be aware of. Back in June of 2022, the U.S. Supreme Court reversed the constitutional right to an abortion that was once protected under the Roe v. Wade ruling of 1973. The reasoning? Well, according to Justice Samuel Alito, that 1973 decision had to be overruled because the arguments were so damaging it amounted to a, quote, abuse of judicial authority, end quote. That reversal was and still is met with nationwide protests. As of the date of this recording, a dozen states have since implemented total or near total bans on abortion, most of which have no exceptions for rape or incest. 4 other states make abortion illegal as early as 6 weeks of pregnancy. Now, there are currently no statewide bans on contraception, which we often refer to as birth control, but in June of 2024, the Senate did fail to advance a bill that would have made access to contraceptives a federal right. The Supreme Court decision has sparked a broader debate about women's rights in this country and where they stand now. Please remember that while we will be hearing from Dr. Deborah Wright-Huyghue and attorney Onika Gilliam today, this is not medical or legal advice. Our conversation serves as a peek into how the changing landscape of this country is playing out in these respective fields. We hope this episode will encourage you to do your own research and spark conversations in your personal circles. Now, let's talk about you.
Happy Sunday! Welcome to episode 2 of season 6 of Let's Talk About You. I am your host, Camilla Francis, and it is always an honor and a privilege to be here with you. Today, we're going to have a real serious, in-depth conversation about women's rights. There's been a lot of talk nationwide of what's going on, of what women should or shouldn't do, what's the law, what's legally done, and I have 2 phenomenal ladies. They're professionals. I have Dr. Deborah Wright-Huyghue and attorney Onika Gilliam, and they're going to share some information based on their knowledge on certain topics here. And we just want you to be informed, but we're doing a disclaimer here because I want to make sure that we're providing information and education here today on Let's Talk About You. So get your pens, your pads, and any questions you may have, get them ready as we begin this episode of Let's Talk About You. Ladies, come on out. Hello, hello, hello. Thank you for being guests here, and Let's Talk About You. I am just so honored and privileged to have you both here with me. They're 2 of my sister friends. One I haven't seen in so long, and it is so good to see your face. And thank you so much, Doc, for always being here to shed some light on concerns that I have. And I'm sure if I have a concern, someone else has one as well. And we're going to jump right on into it today, because today Let's Talk About You. We're talking about reproductive rights. We'll dive deep into both the legal and medical implications due to the reversal of Roe versus Wade, and what exactly that means for us as women, what it is that we can or can't do, and just to provide information and education on the like. So, Dr. Francis, I just want to start with you. A day in the life of the reversal. And I know that you're an OBGYN, and I want you to tell the listening audience about yourself and your field, and then we'll get into Attorney Gilliam.
Good afternoon. It is now Dr. Deborah Wright-Huyghue. I'm about to celebrate 1 year of marriage to the new love of my life. So, um, thank you. Thank you very much. Um, I'm an OBGYN, as you said. I'm a very old OBGYN. I graduated from medical school in 1992. So do the math. So I've been doing this for quite a long time. Right now, I'm practicing in the Virgin Islands as I have been for the last 20 years. But I've just over the last couple of months started to do some what's called locum tenens work in Indianapolis, Indiana. And Indianapolis, Indiana is one of those states that did choose to reverse the Roe. So I've seen some of the ramifications of that change. But first, in St. Thomas, so far, I haven't seen a lot of the ramifications of it. And because our governor came out and reassured us that women still have the same rights as they always did. The problem in the Virgin Islands has been always been access. I practice in St. Thomas and St. Croix. There was a physician on the island of St. Croix who did offer abortions. He actually passed away a few years ago, so that's made access to that type of care a bit more limited over on the island of St. Croix. We still have one provider on the island of St. Thomas who will offer that service. It is a little bit easier to get medications that can help with the interruption of pregnancy in St. Croix. Amazingly, it can be very different on the different islands, not so much on the island of St. Thomas. I've been impressed how resourceful my patients are, just because even as a Title X program working in the family planning clinic, we are able to sort of discuss all the options, but not necessarily say, oh, here's a name for you. But, by the time I see the patients, they kind of have already um, gotten the information and they know who the provider is. And I will certainly say there's a provider on the island, and you can do some research and get to them just so that we don't kind of skirt over some of the Title X laws. Mhm. Title 10 is the federal family planning program, which provides family planning resources to those just to the members of the community. Most folks think of it as something for the underserved and the poor and for teenagers, and it certainly is, because teenagers and just as a plug, I see patients down at Niski Center in the family planning office. It's right across the street from Niski Center. Teenagers 20 and below can actually receive care for free, including birth control in the way of birth control pills, IUDs, the patch, and just women's care services. Those services are available to the general public, and whether or not you're able to pay, have the best insurance in town, self-pay, documented, undocumented, we just make sure that we take care of folks, and that's what I do. And then I usually see patients there in the mornings, and then in the afternoons I see prenatal patients under another federal program called the MCH, Maternal Child Health Grant. And I actually see patients over in St. Croix 1 or 2 days a week sometimes, and then we do provide services in St. John as well. So um, not a ramification of Roe versus Wade, but we do have some patients who are undocumented in St. John who are now very scared to come to St. Thomas for the care that they need. So, so a lot of the changes that are happening in the federal government do have some ramifications on what's happening with us in the Virgin Islands. I have more, but I'll stop there just in case you have any questions of what I said so far.
Well, you have shed some light on the fact that the services that are provided here in the Virgin Islands, and you did mention that you're in Indiana as well.
Oh, okay, yes. So I provide women's healthcare services, which is pretty much the gambit of healthcare. I will see children up here as well as in the Virgin Islands. I haven't seen, I think, anybody younger than 14 so far, but all the way up to. And so I do a full range of women's health care. I do a lot of prenatal care. And as a result, I think most women, like I said, they're already resourceful. So I haven't seen very many early pregnant patients who want to interrupt the pregnancy. So I haven't had my finger on the pulse of that. I do know, and I do not work in the hospital setting.
Okay, well,
Go
that's
ahead.
good to know. So you're providing more public service, which is phenomenal because it's good to know that persons have somewhere to go, even if they're not financially fit to pay for services that are provided, and you provide it to everyone. So that's always good to know. Attorney Gilliam, let me shift to you a little bit. Please announce yourself, tell our listening audience who you are. Thank you. Thank you for saying yes.
Well, my name is Onika Gilliam. I am an attorney. I am currently licensed in California and Washington, primarily practice in Washington State. I did practice in the Virgin Islands for 7.5 years, which is how I know you, of course, but for your audience. Let's see. I primarily do workplace investigations. My background is in employment law, so I was an employment law litigator for entirely far too long, and finally decided to make a shift for my own mental health because going to war every day was just exhausting. And so now I conduct investigations, which I absolutely adore. I don't have a dog in the fight. I get to go in and, ask a lot of questions, which I'm really good at, being nosy. Ask a lot of questions and then make findings, or I shouldn't say findings, make determinations as to whether what I see implicates policies or state or federal law. So that said, I also want to give my own personal disclaimer. That I do practice primarily employment law. So reproductive rights is not my area of expertise or great familiarity, other than sort of keeping myself abreast from a personal perspective, because, I am a woman and I am the mother of two young women. And so, of course, these questions matter to me on a personal level, but also a professional level.
Go ahead.
Okay, so your question was how it's impacted my practice, I guess. So again, since my primary work is in employment law, it hasn't directly impacted my personal practice. However, from what I've seen, right, and also, I'm based in Washington State. Where we are one of the more liberal progressive states. I'm part of the left coast, right? So we continue to have unfettered access to abortion, to medical termination, to miscarriage management, all of the various ways that this has impacted. But professionally, what I'm seeing is, of course, that's interesting that the doctor said that she also practices in Indiana, because Indiana is the state. I don't know if you remember that case with the 10-year-old who, do you remember that a few years ago, who received a termination in Indiana following, her being horribly victimized by someone in Ohio, and the issues that arose because of the interstate travel. And then, of course, Indiana went on to ban entirely. So it's a fast moving train. Just personally, I will say I'm 54 years old, and I certainly took it for granted that this was, that the right to privacy, the right to bodily autonomy certainly extended to my decision about my body and whether to carry a child to term in my body. So this is really disappointing, and I know that my mother, who you knew, would be really, really, really sad to see this. She would be really sad to see this. She was part of the front line of fighting really hard, and used to tell me stories about, people traveling internationally to get abortions in the 60s before Roe was, determined in 1973. And to see this change has been really disappointing.
It has been disappointing for me too, just to hear about the fact that we have to wait to find out what it is that we can and can't do, because things are changing so often as to what it is that we can do to our bodies and the type of treatment that we can receive. I know that you're beginning to give a scenario about the young lady that was severely, I would say, sodomized, and she had to cross country to Indiana to get services. And, you know, when you listen to the news, and I wasn't even sure that I was going to bring this point across, you know, now West Virginia has just passed litigation or provided legislation that incest and rape will not be taken off the table when it comes to the abortion ban. You know, that's something that they're still saying it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you're going through. And my thing to that was, what about even their mental health? So my mental health doesn't even matter in what it is that I want to do, but that's just my sidebar. And, you know, for Dr. Hugh, you know, can you explain certain things even before it gets to the point of a young lady or a woman or anyone thinking about the steps of having an abortion? Because it's not just about the abortion issue for me. It's just about the care, because I know there are things like DNCs and so forth. So can you let our listening audience explain and break down what a dilation is, what a DNC is, what a curettage is, just those different definitions, that just to help our audience understand just some of the things that our reproductive rights entail. And it's not just abortion, yay, nay, save a life or not. It's just a little bit more about what it entails.
So a dilatation and curettage, that's what the D and C stands for.
Okay.
It's curious when I hear C patients write it that they might say D and C, like the Democratic National Convention, just because that's what we say, a D and C.
Yes.
If you're not a medical person, there's no reason what you should know. And basically what a dilatation and curettage means is that we dilate the cervix. And the cervix is the mouth of the womb, the opening of the womb, and it's usually very tight and very closed. That's its normal status. And in order to evacuate anything that's inside the uterus, other than just menstrual blood, we don't need a dilatation. But say, for example, if there's remaining parts of a pregnancy or an unwanted pregnancy, or perhaps even some other uterine anomalies that are causing a woman to bleed in a way that she shouldn't, or a woman who's having postmenopausal bleeding, that is a procedure that they may need. And also when a pregnancy is not successful and may be aborting on its own and causing a woman some increased bleeding and lots of pain, those are all instances in which we might offer a DNC. Right now, when I was doing clinical medicine in the operating room, it was always a decision that we just made based on some clinical findings, what was going on. We certainly used some numbers, whether or not the young lady or woman wanted the pregnancy. But now, even on our boards here, each of the providers, there are very strict criteria for what is determined to be a viable pregnancy, how big it is on ultrasound, whether or not you can see a yolk sac or fetal sac, and those are just a bunch of other terms. So, you know, they are really getting down to the nitty gritty, because I guess there's some fear that we as physicians might decide that a pregnancy or a failing pregnancy is not a failure by whatever the terms are that they decide, and might be doing some DNCs irreverently. So, you know, it's not something that I've had to personally deal with at this point, because I just cover the clinic, and we have some other physicians up here who are doing the surgery part. But even I had a patient who was miscarrying, and I sent her to the emergency room, and I think there was definitely some reluctance about going ahead and doing the DNC. She was in a lot of pain, but they just said, you know, you can just go ahead and pass it on your own. And fortunately, she did okay, and she was fine. But we've all heard the stories of folks who didn't do okay. You know, thank God they are in the minority, even though whenever you lose a young woman at a very early age in the height of her reproductive years, whether it's 1 or 2 or 3, it's just always a travesty. And of course, as a physician, I take that very personally, that it still should be up to us and the patient about when it is the right time to intervene.
What can happen if you don't receive a D&C and it's needed?
Your dream come to life. That is the mission behind Kiki Creations. We're more than a decorating service. We put our all into taking in every detail of your vision and transforming that into breathtaking events. Whether you're celebrating a wedding, retirement, throwing a massive gala, or having an intimate dinner, let Kiki Creations create the moment of your dreams. Celebrate love, laughter, and the moments that really matter with Kiki Creations.
Infinitely me. Handcrafted, intentional, timeless.
Well, thank you for sharing that, because I did want to know the specifics of what can happen if you don't receive a D&C and it's needed, because of the stories that I've heard and we've all heard and listened to on the news.
Correct. And God is so good. He made our bodies so that most of the time we can dispose of a pregnancy on our own, and oftentimes when we have women, whether a pregnancy is wanted or not, and there's some indications based on whether or not they're bleeding, their blood counts, what we see on the ultrasound, that the pregnancy was not going to be successful, we do usually offer them to say, let's see what your body's going to do, because usually our bodies are very good. They'll recognize that the pregnancy has not been successful, meaning that the baby is no longer alive, even though a pregnancy started. Maybe a baby never formed or isn't going to form, and that probably gets a little bit too technical, but we say let's give it a week, maybe even 2 weeks sometimes, particularly if they're not bleeding, they're not in a lot of pain, to just see if their body will go ahead and get rid of the pregnancy for them. Most times it's just like a missed period. Many times it can be a little bit heavier, a lot more cramping, pain involved than just when the period comes on. And sometimes women can begin to hemorrhage, and there's no good way to know. Certainly you're at a higher risk if you're further along, but even sometimes as early as 7 or 8 weeks, rather than just having what's like what we call it a period 2.0, women can start to bleed and their body does not clot the way that it should, and they can become, start to hemorrhage. We usually define that as soaking up more than a pad an hour, be in a lot of pain. And that's when we usually make the clinical call to say, yes, we need to go ahead and do a D&C and help your body complete this process. Much in the same way, sometimes if a woman is not able to have a vaginal delivery for whatever reason, she's not able to push the baby out, her cervix is not dilating, the baby seems to be in distress, we make a clinical decision to go ahead and perform a cesarean section, in order to make sure the mom and the baby is okay. And those decisions have most of my career been allowed to stay in my hands and for me to make those determinations.
Let's get into draw some scenarios. Like, what would happen if a woman miscarriages or an ectopic pregnancy, and the doctor doesn't want to perform the necessary medical procedures?
You went out for a second. Can you repeat the question? Or at least I couldn't hear
What
you.
would happen if a woman has a miscarriage or an ectopic
I didn't hear
pregnancy,
the question.
and the doctor doesn't want to perform the necessary procedures? You said that it's good that our bodies can discharge if necessary, and the baby if. But what happens if the doctor decides that they don't want to assist with the D&C of what the woman is going through?
I have watched in amazement, just like the rest of the country, hearing some of the stories, what has happened. I have purposefully chosen the way something that's chosen and works in my life to not go back into put myself back in the situation where I would be on in that position to have to make those decisions, because I feel like so much of the decision is out of our hand. I have not had
Mhm.
any conversations with the physicians here, because I'm actually in Indiana now, and it's definitely on my list of things to do to see if any of them have been put in that position. But when I see some of the stories, I can't even imagine a scenario where the doctor would not want to do what was necessary. What I've been told, and I've been hearing and seeing on the news, just like everybody else, is that the threat of litigation and the threat of being jailed for intervening, and having folks who are in the hospitals who are watching to make sure that the doctor is not intervening inappropriately or unnecessarily or committing an abortion, I think is what's scaring my colleagues out. Like I said, I'm just supposing, because I, like, when I see those stories, I because of how we train as physicians, and the worst thing that could happen to any of us is to have a patient die, and patients die, sometimes if you do everything you possibly can, and to not do something that that you can do. I have not met a colleague who would necessarily be willing and not want to, but like I said, I haven't really been out there in the trenches in this current scenario. So the short answer is, what happens when they don't want to, or for whatever reason they feel like they cannot, then the patients have to seek care elsewhere, just like we've seen. I actually had a patient since I've been here whose baby had anomalies, things that were discovered on the ultrasound that made that baby, that probably was not going to even make it to term. I was wondering what was going to happen to her. And as I said, I work here for 2 weeks, and then I go back to the States, come back down to the Virgin Islands. And then one of the nurses followed up and said, she called to say that she had gone to a different state to terminate the pregnancy. So
Mhm.
that's what
Mhm.
happens when we're not legally able to, or feel like for whatever reason that we cannot do what we took a Hippocratic oath to do, that the patients have to seek care elsewhere. And I think in some of those rare instances, they are not able to seek that care in a timely fashion, and may not even make it. But yeah, like I said, my fear of having being placed in a situation like that has really kept me, listen, in a very safe clinical setting.
Mhm.
Attorney Gilliam, I know that this is not your field, but just based on any light that you can shed with regards to rights that women may have, or what protections that may have if they're denied, a necessary procedure. Because like Dr.
So,
Francis says, go ahead.
well, a couple of things. One, you said it's interesting the language that you use. You said if they're denied a necessary procedure, right?
Well,
What is the
I shouldn't say
necessity, right?
necessary, but if they're denied a procedure, I can't say necessary.
Yeah, because well, what much of the answer to that question is state driven, right? Actually, all of it, right? It depends on where you are, right? What state you are in. If you are in a state that, for example, does have exceptions for health risk for the mother, and a doctor is comfortable making the determination and feeling comfortable in that determination, and that there's no fetal heartbeat, for example. Fetal heartbeat drives a lot of the ban laws. If and in that case, the doctor would make that decision. But Dr. Deborah makes a really good point about this, intrusion into the decision making purview of both the mother, or the person who is pregnant, and the doctor, her doctor, right? These are decisions that are made in a split second, right? They're usually made pretty quickly. This is not time for briefing, right? You know how long it takes to generate a legal brief. We're not sitting around writing briefs about, is this medically necessary? The health risk of the mother. Is this necessary to prevent her death specifically? I mean, laws that are only about preventing her death, there's a whole lot in between, right? There are, what about the damage to her uterus? What about, you raised mental health, right? A lot of them actually don't, even when they have the health of the mother is at risk, they exempt mental health. because they know that your mental condition could, because I would argue, what if I'm suicidal as a result of having an unwanted pregnancy? Right? If medical termination is the only way to prevent me from not harming myself, then that should be an exemption. But a lot of the states have made sure to specifically address that in the law banning. So, these are decisions that are happening within seconds. And Dr. Deborah made a really good point about even the threat itself is enough in those exigent, urgent moments to have a doctor make a decision not to provide the care, right? That may be necessary. And that's another unfortunate result of this, is the interference between this relationship. It's a relationship that is between the patient and the doctor about decision making. I trust you as the doctor to help me make decisions about my care. And if you are driven by other external forces that are unrelated to serving my care and my needs, as I have asked, then we do not have the kind of relationship that we should have. But yeah, a lot of it is dependent on your state. Some of them, as I said, do exempt from a ban, from prohibition, exempt that which is necessary for the treatment or the health of the mother, whether it be to prevent her death, etc. So, again, check in with your state, where you are, what you're doing. If you're in Indiana, this is another thing. As I was looking at some cases before our talk today, there's a case coming up about, not to belabor this point, but about Medicaid funding, right? So Medicaid funding, federal funding, there's federal law that says if you are receiving Medicaid, then you also have to provide necessary stabilizing treatment, right? So that's a conflict if you are a hospital receiving federal funds, where you got a direction from the federal government that you must provide necessary stabilizing treatment to a patient, versus a state ban, which says only if the risk is death of the mother. There's a lot in between, right? To stabilize a patient versus, are they going to die as a result of me not doing whatever this procedure is? And so that conflict right now is at the Supreme Court, or it's working its way back there. It's back in the Ninth Circuit. But, I was thinking about people who travel. Dr. Deborah mentioned her her patient was able to travel to another state. A lot of people can't. And those people are the poor people receiving Medicaid funding, right? So you've got people receiving funding who are not in a position, who rely on the government to support medical treatment. And that is why they are unable to have the sort of liberties that perhaps my daughters could enjoy, right? If they were in one of these states. And so you see the overlap between, financial, right? Your financial situation, and your access to medical care. And that seems fundamentally un-American to me, right? But we could digress, and I could talk about a lot of things that are un-American in my opinion. But yeah, that's kind of a long way to get around to. It's driven by your state, however they interpret it. Whether there's a fetal heartbeat, that will drive a lot of what sort of treatment you could have. But please, anybody listening to this, take this moment right now to Google your state.
Yes.
Find out what your rights are in your jurisdiction, your state, your territory, to find out what the laws are and what your rights are in your jurisdiction. You should know this before you find yourself in a position of having to assert your rights where others may be trying to prevent you from exercising them.
That's actually, yeah, amen to that. That is actually excellent advice, because it does change from state to state. And the one thing that I know locally, we haven't had a lot of the issues that we hear about or we read about and see on internet, television, and the like. But at the end of the day, because we're a territory of the United States, there will be a trickling effect somewhere or the other, whether it's in the finances and the funding and what they will cover and what they won't cover. I figure we need to be informed. We need to know what's going on, because it will trickle down somewhere or the other.
Mhm.
And let's talk a
And
little bit
and I
about,
wanted to chime in.
go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to chime in about the resourcefulness of our patients. I had a patient in the Virgin Islands who, who had an IUD, and I told her, she came in to get the IUD removed and have another one replaced. And I said, well, I think you have 2 or 3 more years on this IUD based on what the company recommends. And she says, no, I don't trust that. She said, I want to have mine taken out and replaced while I still can. So
Okay.
there again, it speaks to the fact that she had the insurance and the resources to do that. Some people don't. But these are the things that our patients are thinking about, because we don't know what's coming next. And right now, contraception is not on the table, but who knows what's going to happen tomorrow.
True, and that's good to know that she's advocating for herself, because
Absolutely.
we need to know that we have to be able to advocate for ourselves, or have sisters like you two that would assist us with advocating. How do I advocate for myself?
And you don't want to find out that your doctor has their own conscious objection in the middle of them needing to make a decision about your medical care. You should know that before you start, right? So, what is your doctor's opinions and beliefs?
Are you considering owning a firearms and don't know what steps to take? Call VI Guns and Ammo LLC. They are the perfect place to offer you basic firearm classes. They have the application fee. They'll do full background checks for you and assist you with all the ins and outs and the logistics of owning a firearm in the Virgin Islands. Go on, give them a call, 305-333-8802, VI Guns and Ammo LLC. That's the place to assist you with all your firearm training needs. Call them today.
As a physician, if a patient was to come and say, can you give me your personal opinion as to what I should do, what would your advice be? Because sometimes they ask that to get to decide what it is they should do for their bodies.
So as I said, I've been doing this a long time. When I first started, when I was a brand new doctor, I was hardcore by the book. This is what, let me get out my articles, and this is what ACOG says, the American College of OBGYN. And here 30 years in, I still largely follow that, but there's always some wiggle room with the guidelines, and even medicine, is always evolving. And there's really in almost all of our ACOG recommendations now, there's something called shared decision making. And I have had the pleasure for being in the Virgin Islands for 20 years. I have a lot of patients who I've had a long time, even though I've been in some different places. So I've gotten to know them. And God has given me a gift of some instincts. I had a patient even up here in Indiana, her husband. I said, well, you seem the nervous type. He says, it's funny how you pick that up in 2 minutes of knowing her, And so I use that when I'm helping patients to make decisions about whatever it is, whether it's the kind of birth control they're going to use, whether or not they should have surgery, if they're pregnant, whether or not they want to try to do a vaginal delivery, if they've had a C-section before. So I really try to get to know them and have them get to know themselves. And I can play out some scenarios to say, how are you going to feel about it? Say, for example, we have lots of patients not lots of patients, but, patients who sometimes they might find out that their baby has Down syndrome. That's not something that's incompatible with life. But there are some patients who know that or feel that they do not have the capacity to raise a child or even give birth to a child that may not be what's considered to be all the way normal. And so those are the kinds of conversations we have to have. There are some patients who, I don't even want the test to see if it has Down syndrome because I'm going to have my baby no matter what. There are some patients like, yep, I want all the information. I know I'm not going to do anything different, but I want to be prepared. So I really try to get to know my patients as much as I can. And then if it is somebody that I've met for the first time, you know, whatever it is going on, like I said, whether or not they want to continue, whether it's about a pregnancy, whether or not it's time to get a D&C, I say these are kind of our options. If they put it back in my court, and I might say, I said, you seem like you're a kind of a cool cookie, you know, you're going to be okay. You know, you understand that if you have an emergency type situation, do you have the kind of support, somebody who's going to be able to get you to the hospital? If I have a young lady who is, you know, there with a baby on her hip and looks like she's distraught, then I may encourage her to let's do something more proactive so that she doesn't find herself in a situation where there are going to be a lot of variables that are out of her control. So the short answer is like the attorney said, is back to the states. I really try to individualize what's going on with the patients. Now, all of that changes. And I used to tell my patients when I was delivering babies, I said, as you see, I like to talk and chat and be friends or whatever. When you see me get quiet, I'm trying to save your life or save your baby's life. So if I'm not talking, that means it's really going down. and I'm probably not going to be giving you a lot of choices because I'm going to be making decisions that I feel like I'm the one who's qualified to make decisions. Thank God I haven't had very many of those situations, but I have had some of them where it's like, you know, you have to trust me that I'm doing what I need to do to make sure that you're okay. And in the case of even an ectopic pregnancy, which can be a medical emergency, there again, it's not always something that requires surgery right away. Sometimes we can address those kinds of situations with medications, but there again, case by case, how are you doing? Are you okay? Because sometimes it is a lot of waiting. Some folks do better with waiting than others. Some folks, you know, they need to just kind of have something definite and definitive. So then we make those kind of decisions. So I practice a lot of shared decision making because in the words of my dear departed father, people are going to do what they want to anyway. So you might as well make them feel comfortable telling you that they're not going to do what you've suggested. So for us to make a decision together about what's going to happen or not going to happen.
That's good to know. And I want to say thank you for advocating for women and your patients. Attorney Gilliam, I'm just asking, what are your thoughts as to, you know, Dr. Hugh was talking about contraceptives and birth control. And right now it is legal to for the U.S. Postal Service to deliver, if you order, you know, the Plan B or abortion pills. And that's, you know, will be in their favor. But what are your thoughts as to the states that even though the delivery is legal, them taking it if they're informed, you know, just your thoughts on that.
Right. So a couple of things that I just wanted to point out. First off, and the doctor can correct me, my understanding is that Plan B is actually different from medical termination pill, which is mifepristone. You hear about it all the time in the news. Plan B, kind of, my understanding, acts like an IUD in that it prevents fertilization, right? So there's something like either it prevents the egg from being released or the sperm from fertilizing the egg. So Plan B is sort of in a different realm than medical termination medication, which currently, so this is actually interesting because it's a very timely question. I did not know this, but since Roe versus Wade was overturned by Dobbs, medical termination through let's call it the abortion pill, right? Through the abortion pill has increased to 70% of what is, you know, the medical means by which termination is being accomplished. So it's a significant percentage of terminations in the United States of America. And a lot of that is due to the telehealth, right? So before Dobbs is the decision that overturned Roe versus Wade, to put it in simple terms, right? And that was in 2022. But since Roe versus Wade in 1973, we know that for 50 years, there has been a movement to chip away at it and chip away at it and chip away at it. And when I went to law school and after, what that looked like were restrictions on accessing abortion. So even though the U.S. Supreme Court in Roe versus Wade had said it is, you know, as your right to privacy, you can make this decision to terminate. So therefore it's legal, right? Because that's, you have the constitutional protection for the right to make the decision to terminate a pregnancy. What that looked like is in places like Texas, requiring that only doctors who were licensed in certain hospitals could perform the procedure, which was only 2 of those hospitals in the entire state, for example. Like, I'm giving examples. So these are the ways that they would restrict your ability to access it, by making it that you have to then travel for 300 miles to be able to access a licensed facility where you could have an abortion lawfully. So that's what existed before, were these attempts at restricting your access so much that it essentially prevented you from getting an abortion if you didn't have the financial means to travel 500 miles or to travel to another location. So, but now in the face of the ban, what we have is, okay, so now I can ban it. We've got certain states, like my state of birth, New York, and I raised New York because this is right now on the national stage, this issue. Governor Hochul, the governor for the state of New York has what's called a shield law, which shields medical providers in New York State, and many progressive and liberal states have these, legally protects them from prosecution in jurisdictions where abortion is unlawful. It protects them from receiving criminal penalties or civil penalties, right? So what that looks like, we're seeing on the national stage right now. Louisiana and Texas both have what are extremely onerous and prohibitive laws on their books. Louisiana makes it a crime for anyone to assist or to provide a termination. That's Louisiana. Texas makes it also a crime. There are civil and criminal penalties. It's a felony. New York has a shield law. So now this is where you've got the conflict, because you've got a doctor in New York who was prescribing through telehealth, right? Through telehealth to patients in Texas and Louisiana. She's prescribing the abortion pill. It's then being mailed to those people in those jurisdictions, to the women in those jurisdictions. And now in Louisiana, there's a warrant out for this doctor's arrest in New York. And they're asking that Governor Hochul in New York extradite the doctor to Louisiana to face criminal penalties. Texas they decided not to go criminally, they decided to do civil. And they've now got a civil order against this doctor in New York for $100,000, right? So this is all happening in the last 2 months, right? It's all literally hitting. It's an interesting case you should look up. So this is a conflict, right? This is the beauty of being several states in a union, right? Our union, which is the United States, is we are seeing the divide between our thinking so great. So you've got, if you look at a map of where these bans are, you've got the South and the East. It's a swath of ban, right? The South and the East is a swath of ban. You've got your West Coast, also called the left coast. You've got your Northeast, which tends to be also very liberal. And you've got like Illinois and some other states. But what has allowed this doctor in New York to successfully treat people in Louisiana and Texas is the law that made it lawful for her to send the abortion pill through the mail, through a courier service. What I am asking everyone to pay attention to, which I think will be really significant and will change everything, because now we've got the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who, when he was running, said he was, I wouldn't mess with abortion. Same thing with Trump. He said, I'm not interested in a national abortion ban. I sent it back to the states. That's what I wanted to do. Well, now there is a concern that with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. now saying that he'd be willing to look at a national abortion ban. And, Trump having just gone back on everything he said while he was campaigning, right? There's the concern that they are now going to change it, and you cannot send this abortion pill through telehealth, that it's going to now require in-person visits and all of these things, and or that there may be some Supreme Court ruling on shield laws and whether or not you can reach across a shield law and grab a doctor in New York and punish them through your state judicial or your state criminal justice system. So, that's going to be the big one, especially since when I was reading these numbers about the increase in the abortion pill being the means and methodology for terminations now. If you can no longer ship that, that's going to prevent access to so many women. Oh, and I was reading an interesting statistic. 1/3 of women in the United States live in a state where abortion is completely banned. 1/3. 1/3. I mean, that's just, and there's still another third that's got restrictions on it, right? And making it difficult, but not banning it entirely. But that's a total ban. That's yeah. So that's my answer about the abortion pill. I wish I could remember their name because I prefer that over the abortion pill. But that is what it is. Mifepristone. I can't remember. I'm not the doctor.
Mr. Purple.
There you go. Those things.
We don't
that's on the
name
chopping block
either because nobody knows the names.
Okay. Exactly.
That was a lot, and you're right. There is a huge divide, and it's like there's so many things that you're made us aware that are pending, and it's pending that even though it's fine in that one state, there's potential extraditions and fines and penalties for doing something that he, because of his state, legal, but because of the travel, made his legal procedure illegal or and worthy of a fine and so forth. And yes, I hope our listening audience is taking notes, not necessarily to say what is right or what is wrong, but the fact that you need to be mindful of what it is that's going on with your body and how you want to treat it. And you need an advocate. You need to advocate for your rights as an individual and to get the care that you deserve, because we all deserve that. And the legal attention. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to add, it's also important to know what's happening on a national scale as well for people who are considering moving, where your kid goes to college. These are considerations. If your kid happens to go to college in Indiana, right, this is one of the things that they might want to consider, right? Or if they're in another state, it affects travel, right? Interstate travel. It definitely impacts interstate travel. So these are definitely things that, we should all be mindful of what's happening, even if it's not
and because of
happening or directly impacting you in your state.
Absolutely. Dr. Huyghue, have there been any recent medical guidelines that you've been given based on the reversal or anything that's going on because of what you can and can't do? Has things changed with your guidelines?
Mostly what I said is just that I can't say with 100% certainty that all of the strict guidelines about what constitutes a failed pregnancy didn't exist, but I don't necessarily remember learning them. It used to be something that was very clinical, and certainly we know that, okay, well, if a lady comes in and what we call her pregnancy number is really low, and if it's a pregnancy that she wants, then we have different things that we do to follow to see how, if that pregnancy number is increasing appropriately. But like I said, even here at all of the provider stations at the clinic where I'm working here, there are these very strict guidelines about when for an early pregnancy, what constitutes a failed pregnancy, whether or not the gestational sac, the yolk sac, the fetal sac, whether or not there's a fetal pole, whether or not there's heart tones. All of these words are like parts of what happens in the very first 4 to 6 weeks of pregnancy. What's there, how big it is. If it's not this, if this is not bigger than this and this is not this size, then it doesn't meet the criteria. So those are things where, like I said, where before we've always been able to see clinically this is what's going on. But I mean, I think these guidelines have come out and been put forth so that almost kind of to protect us as physicians, to say this is what's there, so that if we ever end up in a court of law, we have these very objective criteria, whereas in the past I think it's been a whole lot more subjective, so that we can say this was not a viable pregnancy, and this is how we determine that, by something that's very objective versus our usual subjective way of doing things.
And the guidelines, not just with regards to how to handle pregnancies, but with regards to contraceptives and birth control and who you administer them to. Have there been any guidelines with regards to that?
Just updates to basically say, for right now, everything is the same, that nobody, as far as none of the laws have restricted those types of things. But there again, the reading between the lines, and I think, as I said, our patients are picking up on it, is that we need to be having these conversations and staying in front of it, because it may very well change. We don't know that. So certainly for, and just to say, to have these very open discussions with your clients. And we may have somebody who is in her 40s who hasn't had a tubal ligation, maybe doesn't want any children anymore, whereas before she was willing to kind of ride it out and I don't think I can get pregnant and be okay with that. But now, I'm having, you may or may not have any choices if you do have an unwanted pregnancy. So we really, I personally probably push, I've always been big on family planning and offering birth control, but certainly put it out there a little bit more than I used to about, let's just be very proactive and take charge of this thing that you can take charge of, as far as, whether or not you want to be able to get pregnant again, or be able to plan your family. When do you want it to happen? So your choices may be limited on the back end. So let's try to give you as many choices as you can on the front end.
Yeah.
Which, oddly enough, is not always a warmly received conversation. And I was taught, when I was trained, from the first prenatal visit, start talking about family planning, about what are you going to do after you have the baby. I found now that sometimes I get a side eye, like, well, what are you asking me about that for? Are you trying, are you trying to impose your will? So there again, I've probably started to pull back a little bit, trying to read the room a little bit, of saying, okay, well, this is not a discussion that you want to have. But there again, I'm trying to tell them that be mindful that the same smorgasbord of choices that exist now may or may not exist 9 months from now. So true. And it's my job to try to inform you as best I can.
What do you think that your patients or patients on the whole need to look out for the coming months?
I think just what we've just discussed is and what the attorney said. We need to pay attention. And I think it's so easy, including for those of us, like myself, on the front line, so easy to just be overwhelmed, allow ourselves to be overwhelmed, stick our heads in the sand. I can say, well, I've gone through the menopause, I don't have to worry about it. But I have a daughter of reproductive age who lives in Louisiana. My other daughter lives in DC. So I think that we all, no matter how much we want to just go put our heads under the covers and wish all of this stuff away, we have to stay informed, stay educated, and have some of these healthy discussions with ourselves, and mothers with our daughters, even with our sons, say, hey, this is what's going on, right, and be mindful of what you're doing, how you're doing it, because some of these choices, may go away. So I think it's always just try to be as informed as you can possibly be. Really have some tough conversations with yourself about what it is that you want for your family planning, and basically you got to have an emergency fund from a financial point of view, because some things just come up where, as we've seen on the national stage, where maybe it's a very much wanted pregnancy, but there's some issues with it. So we have to do the things to keep that little emergency fund, so that if we need to hop on a plane or take a bus or whatever, that we are not, our options are not decided for us. and I know that's for some of us, it's easier said than done when it's, we're living paycheck to paycheck and for whatever reason, but those kinds of things are important.
I mean, this has been such a great conversation. It shed light on things that I was curious about, concerns that I have, because not, as I said before, not because we live on a little island, things trickle down. We are a part of the United States. So we do need to be mindful. And with that being said, Attorney Gilliam, would you like to share any closing remarks or thoughts as we get ready to wrap up?
I mean, pretty much piggybacking off of Dr. Deborah, I'm a big fan of, as you know, you use the word advocating, right? Self-advocacy. I'm a big fan of self-advocacy and knowledge, right? This is not to get too political, but I do think that a lot of what I am seeing now is the result of a populace that lacks critical thinking and that has been intentionally prevented from information to educate them, right? I do think that serves an agenda. So, that would be my biggest, to make sure that you are educated not only about your state laws or your territory or jurisdiction's laws, but also who your provider is, right? I believe your previous questions talked about conscious clause, right? Conscious clauses have been around for a little bit, not that long, but they've been around a little bit. And, you don't want to find out that your doctor has their own conscious objection in the middle of them needing to make a decision about your medical care. You should know that before you start, right? So, what is your doctor's opinions and beliefs? A lot of hospitals are religious-based organizations now. A lot of people don't know that, certain religious-based medical hospitals have restrictions about certain information, or they won't educate you at the front end. So you need to find these things out before you find yourself in a situation. I don't know if you're still there. Yeah, where you need them to implement your desires for your body. You should find that out now. So go talk to your doctors. Go look up the law in your jurisdiction. Find out about your hospital, right? If it is a Catholic hospital, it may very well have, your pharmacy, will they even fill the prescription for the abortion pill? These are the things that you should be finding out. So educate yourself. Make sure that you're educated so that you can make sure that you're taking care of your body the way you want to, and that you can also help your friends and family and your sister group. So
Yes.
There we go. That would be my closing.
Yes. Thank you. Dr. Hugh?
I think that's it. We stay informed. Tell a friend. All the things that the attorney said. But most of all, continue to have faith and to not lose hope. I am a woman of great faith, and despite all that is happening, God is still on the throne, and I think that He will provide for us. But God is also, He wants us to be involved and to take some action and to partner with Him in making sure that that our life is the life that He wants for us, and help somebody else.
This was such a delightful conversation, ladies. Thank you so much for sharing your Sunday with me and being a part of the Let's Talk About You family. Onika, it is so good to see you.
Likewise, sister.
Deborah, you've been on the show several times, and you've always brought light in every different form that I've asked. And I so appreciate your yeses, because you've always shed such light. So, we've already nominated you as the expert of Let's Talk About You. And as I want to remind our listening audience that the contents and the information brought forth here today and Let's Talk About You, it's strictly for information and educational purposes, and it does not amount as any professional advice. And our medical disclaimer is information provided on this show It's only meant to educate you and inform you. And you should consult with your healthcare provider regarding specific medical questions or issues that may have. And our legal disclaimer is this information is only provided to provide educational and information. And you should consult with an attorney regarding any specific legal questions or issues that you may have. Let's talk about you, family. Thank you so much. This is episode 2 of season 6. Thank you so much for sharing your Sunday with me. And as always, stay blessed on purpose. Thank you, guys.
Bye.